Happy New Year, fifth grade mathematicians. Today I am going to talk about lessons 3.7 and 3.8. We worked on 3.7 before the break and we'll be working on 3.8 right after the break. So on this first page, you see our learning targets for these two lessons. First of all, you learned how to write formulas using spreadsheet names. We have earlier in this chapter evaluated algebraic expressions and formulas, and earlier this year we added signed numbers, so these would be positive and negative numbers. Our key vocabulary: spreadsheet, cell, column, row, and those were all part of lesson 3.7, and in lesson 3.8, square root. So here is an example of a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets actually got their names from ledger sheets that people used to keep for their financial records. So bookkeepers or store owners would keep a ledger when people would come in and purchase things, and they'd be able to keep their balance. So we talked about some of the vocabulary. I'm going to get highlighter here. One of the vocabulary words was column, and here is column A. So it's going in that direction. So on this spreadsheet, we have columns A, B, C, and D. So we also had as a vocabulary word row. And on this spreadsheet, we have rows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the other word that was a vocabulary word was cell. Each of these individual rectangles represent a cell. So here's a cell. And we can describe what's in that cell. So in this case, this cell contains the number 87.5, and it's in column D, row 2. So we often call it D2. If we wanted to see what was in A3, we'd look in column A, row 3, and we'd see the name David. So we've got columns, rows, and then individual cells. We can use a spreadsheet to create formulas, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my pen this time, and I'm going to say, what if I want to find out what belongs in D3? So it's cell D3, and I want to know what number goes there. Well, I see that in row 1, this has the word average. D1 has the average, so it tells me that I'm finding the average of students' scores. Column B, row 1, B1 has test 1, C1 has test 2. So these students have had 2 tests, and I want to find out David's average. So I want to find what number I will put in D3. So D3 is what I'm solving for. And the formula would be what is in B3, the number that's in B3, plus the number that is in C3. And then to find an average, we divide by the number of numbers. And in this case, there are 2 numbers. So if I want to calculate what goes in D3, I will take the score that is in B3 plus the score that is in C3, and I will divide by 2 to get that number. So there's an example of a spreadsheet with cells and rows and columns, and these cells can be used to help us write a formula. So another target for this chapter was evaluating expressions. Here's an example of an algebraic expression. When we evaluate an expression or a formula, we find the value of a variable when other values are given. So in this case, the direction tells us to evaluate when y is 12. So I'm simply going to substitute the number 12, the value 12, for y. So I think, what is 12 plus 17? I'll grab my pen again. Y is 12, so I'm going to substitute 12 for y plus 17. If I do that, I get 29. So when y is 12, the result of adding 17 to that is 29. I can also evaluate formulas. In this case, I have a formula for the area of a triangle, which is 1/2 base times height, or 1/2 length times width, and it tells me to evaluate the formula when the base is 3 and the height is 8. So again, the area is going to be 1/2, and then I'm going to substitute. My base is 3 times my height of 8. 3 times 8 is 24, and 1/2 of 24 is 12. So in this case, the area is 12 because I've evaluated the expression by replacing this variable with a value. We're going to do the same thing in lesson 3.8 with a distance formula. So the first thing I'm going to show you is just the information about finding the square root. And most calculators have a square root key, but it depends on your calculator exactly how it's used. And we found that with other things on our calculators. If you have the calculator that is recommended or that you could have purchased at the beginning of the year, you're going to find that you'll put in the square root key and you'll put in the number that you want to find the square root for, but then you'll have to put in the parentheses key. And it says, note, on this calculator, the one many of you use, you have to close the square root by pressing that parentheses key. When you press the square root key, it will automatically put a parentheses in front of it. You'll then type in the number, and then you'll close the parentheses, enter or equal, and you'll find the display. Shows you that the square root of 25 is 5. The square root of 10,000 is 100. So again, you'll put in that square root sign. Most of you will have that sign on your calculator, and you'll have to explore a little bit to see how it is used on your particular calculator. So I told you that we'd be using that square root key to evaluate a distance formula. And the formula is d, which is distance, equals 1.25 times the square root of h, which is the height. So if I told you that the height was equal to 25, we just learned that the square root of 25 is 5. So this h d equals 1.25 times the square root of h, or the square root of 25, which would be times 5. I didn't write that too well. Let's see if I can erase that and do a little bit better. So 1.25 times, and we said the square root of 25 is 5. When we multiplied those two numbers, we would learn what the distance equaled. All right, I have given you a few problems to solve, so you'll have to pause the video to solve these problems. This goes back to our third learning target, which is adding signed numbers mentally. So you're going to be looking at these numbers. We begin with the easiest and work up to something a little bit harder. Think about what is 4 plus a negative 6, and then negative 12 plus 16. So you're going to get positive or negative answers. So you've got this piece. So you might want to pause and get those answers. And then on the next slide, you have another set of mental math. And you're solving for S, for A. So you're evaluating these formulas by solving. Negative 6 plus 5 equals S. What would S equal when you add those two numbers? So again, you can pause the video. You're going to have 6 problems to solve here and on the previous page. you had 6 to solve. So bring those answers with you and we will talk about them in class.